I wanted to do a video on this apparent war that's going on, whether people should wear masks or not. And I want to point out how most of these debates are really debates about abstractions. So I want to kind of cover where these come from, how they originate in mind, and how they diverge from reality, and how there is a resolution from it, but it may not be real obvious. And so when I talk about abstractions, all I mean is a thought about reality rather than actual reality. And these thoughts can be very helpful. So if I have a thought that I should step out of the way of an oncoming car or it's going to hit me, that thought can be very useful. Or if I have a thought that I should be careful while I'm cutting a bagel because I might get cut. And you can go through a long list of how thoughts can be really useful when they're very close to reality. And that is itself, of course, an abstraction. It's a metaphor. And this is a whole other video of why we use metaphors. Um, but the whole point is that the mind is a very useful tool when it creates these abstractions, as long as they're very close to reality. The problem we're having right now, and this is really the entire problem with politics, is that the abstractions have gotten so far removed from reality that they cease to be useful. And while they have gotten very far from reality, the interesting trick here is that the mind believes, of course, that they are still very, very close to reality. And we have this phrase, come to your senses. And both sides, all sides of political debates always use that phrase because they just are in the dark and clueless how the other side could possibly have arrived at their conclusions. And so a student posted the other day on social media like a Civil War pic, and it had both sides absolutely dead set on each of their positions about wearing a mask, and the other side said, no, I'm not wearing one. Of course, both sides were absolutely convinced that they were right and confident, and it was escalated to the point of an actual civil war. And the reason that probably will catch on quite a bit is because there's an element of truth to it, that the debate has taken on sort of a life of its own. And so throughout this entire, not just this debate, but any political debate that's gone on, I have yet to see anyone who's come out and admitted that the thinking mind simply is in the dark. It's clueless. It doesn't know what is going to happen. And this is one of the humbling aspects of the thinking mind, because the truth is, when chaos theory and the butterfly effect and the recognition that the human mind is incredibly limited when it comes to complex systems, when this was all being recognized, it didn't really make its way into popular media very much, for a good reason. The mind wants to be arrogant. The mind doesn't want to admit its limitations. Think about something as simple as the weather. The weather is a complex system, and we can't even predict really if it's going to rain. And so the mind is extremely limited when it comes to complex systems, complex physical systems. So think about something like a virus that integrates humans into the whole equation. And so it was pretty clear that the mind has no clue what's going to happen, if wearing a mask is a good thing, if not wearing a mask is a good thing. And so in the end, the mind has to step aside and recognize that nature is so complex that the mind has never been able to bottle it, control it, or really recognize its processes to the point of being able to predict successfully. I mean, look at when they tried to model nature and the complexity of this virus, and practically every single one of these models had failed. And so no one really knows what we should be doing. And that's so what kind of video comes out and says, well, look, you may have expected me to kind of pick a side and kind of go with it, but that's exactly what I'm not doing. I'm actually taking option C and saying, look, no mind knows what's going to happen. But there is a practical side to this. And you say, okay, well, what do I do with this? Because, not choosing not to decide is still a choice. And you say, well, is this just a bury your head in the sand kind of approach? And really it isn't. The mind's going to do what it does. The mind is like, that one quote, how the brain breathes beliefs like the lungs breathe air. So the mind is going to come up with these abstractions, and the mind not only will come up with abstractions, politics, but it's also going to have absolute metaphysical certitude that it's absolutely correct in every one of its um, conclusions. So there's not much we can do about the mind and its tendency to kind of go along its path and do what it does really well, which is to create theories about reality and then conclude that its theories are absolutely right. Um, but there is something we can do, and that is to recognize this. In other words, maybe not much changes on the surface. We go through and we make the same decisions we would otherwise. Wear, don't wear, open up the country, don't open up. Whatever the mind decides is what the mind is going to decide. But there's a small little element of doubt that we can cast in all of that. And when I say doubt, what I'm saying is for consciousness to distance itself a little bit from the workings of the mind, recognize the mind for exactly what it is, an abstraction machine that's trying to predict reality. And the more it tries to predict it, the further it removes itself from reality. So this is kind of like reality therapy. Reality therapy is just waking up to the immediate moment and that insight that I don't know, that the mind um, is a useful tool, but it's limited when it comes to these complex systems. And there's a certain humbling sense where, look, the mind doesn't know. It's going to do the best job it can, and I may go through my day with absolute, and my mind may have absolute certainty that I'm right and you're wrong. But when you distance things a little bit, then that opens up a little bit, like, well, maybe I'm wrong and you're right. And what that does is it creates a sense of playfulness, a sense of non-seriousness with these beliefs and with these abstractions. And I think that is really a very good trick to kind of bring into the world. So let me see how that works out for you. And as always, leave some comments. I'd be interested to see what your thoughts are on this whole sort of abstraction war that we've got going on.